Hello, Sam. Congratulations on your new book, All Societies Die, How to Keep Hope Alive.
Thanks, son. I'm pretty happy about the book too.
Well, we're proud to be publishing it, and we're excited to hear you have a presentation for us about the backstory to the book and what inspired you to write it, the whole 9 yards. So we look forward to hearing from you in this video presentation.
Okay, I'd be happy to tell you all that. So what do you want to know?
So, what inspired you to write this book?
I'm 66 years old. At some point, I'm going to die, and increasingly, I'm more and more aware of the fact that I'm going to die. I'm a sociologist. One of the basic ways that sociologists think is they often see the extreme similarities between individual life and collective life. Societies are often more like people than you would ever imagine. So as I started to watch myself getting older and more vulnerable, I began to wonder if societies get older and more vulnerable. And as I faced the prospect of inevitable death, I began to wonder if societies actually die. We're used to extreme versions where societal death is an unusual catastrophe, like there's an ecological disaster, oh my God, or there's a nuclear war, oh my God. But I began to wonder if humans normally die, do societies normally die? The answer to that seems to be yes. And that's what made me write All Societies Die. This is the book I wrote about societal death. I wanted to just have it all societies die and forget the hope stuff, but they convinced me that there's actually hope, so I added the hope title at the end. There really is reason for hope because there are things people can do now that lengthen our life. Just as a human being, I can exercise, I can eat healthy, I can avoid smoking. There are things that people can do in society that allows their society to live longer and their society to prosper more. All societies die. Societal death is a normal process. Ancient Rome only lasted 864 years. Nearly all of the ancient dynasties of China were short-lived. None of them really lasted more than 500 years. Most were significantly shorter. No ancient Egyptian kingdom lasted longer than 800 years. The Old Kingdom almost made 800. The Middle Kingdom died in a tidy 400 years. The New Kingdom barely made 500. We live in what we would call the European American world system. The European American world system is roughly 650 years old. If we date it from the early movements of economic recovery that occurred in Flanders, in France, in the 1300s. So if we date ourselves from 650 years old, call it 700 if you're pessimistic, the longest societies last 1,000 years. We are, at best, middle-aged, if you're going to be optimistic. More realistically, we're old. Now, there are many ways for humans to die. I mean, you can have cancer, you can have a heart disease, you can get hit by a bus. The same thing applies to societies. The most common one that people think about is ecological disaster. And ecological disasters do occur. Angkor Wat, a great civilization in Cambodia, really did die because their citizens overforested, they chopped down too many trees, it killed their irrigation system, their food supply collapsed. You can simply be conquered by foreigners. mean, the Aztecs and the Mayas died because the Spanish conquistadors came and just took them over. You can die of internal warfare. Somalia has a long historical record of hyper ethnic rivalry and frequent state collapse. You can also die of economic collapse. This is particularly relevant for a capitalist society, but it occurs in simpler societies too. Somalia has had a perpetually endangered economy, and that leads to much of its hyper-ethnic rivalry. What most people don't realize, and does not show up on the standard list of death causes, is that loss of governmental effectiveness is a common cause of societal death. Most societies, when they rise, have a government that is doing something useful. Most societies, when they decline, that government becomes less good at doing what it used to do well. The government is off its game. Sometimes this is simply due to massive human incompetence. Sometimes it's due to political rivalries and divisions. In fact, frequently, internal divisions in the government destroy its effectiveness. This is to a large extent what happened to the King of France before the French Revolution. However, Louis XVI and the French Revolution had another problem, which also led to his fall: loss of tax revenue. It is a near universal that societies that fall have enormous financial problems with their government. The government just can't pay its bills. It's unable to pay its bills because it no longer has tax revenue. We normally think of taxes as being something bad, something you want to avoid, but taxes are like nutrition for societal effectiveness. They're what goes into the government, allowing the government to do the magic that it does. They lose the tax revenue, they lose their abilities. People complain that the government is corrupt and incompetent after they lose their tax revenue. Governments become much more corrupt and incompetent. A government that starts at the level of Switzerland, if underfunded enough, can turn out to be as corrupt as the Congo. In the ancient and medieval worlds, the only function of the government was defense. A modern government has to do far more. In particular, a modern capitalist government is responsible for the national economy. When politicians run on platforms saying that they will produce low unemployment and growth of gross domestic product, they're not kidding. The governments under their control really do produce that. If those politicians or the governments fail, economies crash. And there really are famous governments that have been mismanaged and have caused their economies to crash. In the Great Depression, the economic mismanagement of the Hoover administration in the United States, of the various British administrations of the 1930s, of the bourgeois governments before the Popular Front in the 1930s France, all are known for their horrendous economic mismanagement that took the stock market crash of 1929 in New York and turned it into a global disaster. Those governments got into trouble by frenetically reducing their expenditure at the time that they needed to be spending more to keep their economies afloat. The essence of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal was putting in the government spending that Herbert Hoover thought he wouldn't need. The English and the French were making the same mistake that FDR was not making. And to everyone's concern, that Adolf Hitler was not making. His was the only economy that was growing too. He was building up his army. Under normal non-depression conditions, governments pay for the things that economies need. There are Ayn Rand fans out there who think that if the economy needs it, a capitalist will provide it. That is simply not true. Business will only provide things that are profitable. If it's profitable to fly an airplane from Boston to New York, they'll do it. If it's profitable to sell you hamburgers, they'll do it. If it's profitable to sell you upscale cuisine, they'll do it. If a project loses money, they won't do it. Some things that economies need are just not profitable. Without those not profitable things, the economy will die. Either the government provides it, or the economy does without. The obvious example is education. Yes, very rich people will pay for education, and businesses can go into business offering super deluxe education for rich children. Private schools work with paid tuition. But they only educate people who can pay tuition. A capitalist economy needs everyone to know how to read. A capitalist economy needs everyone to know how to do math. If you want your slum dwellers to know how to read, and your slum dwellers to know how to do math, or your slum dwellers to know enough chemistry so they can work in your oil refinery, someone is going to have to pay for primary school. Someone's going to have to pay for high school. For certain kinds of job training, someone's going to have to pay for community college. Education is essential to a modern technological economy. Highways are essential to growth. When we talk about the great economic burst that occurred in the United States in the 1950s, a giant piece of that came from Dwight Eisenhower paying for the interstate highway system, giving America one of the best road networks in the world. Highways are colossally expensive. You have to buy a vast amount of real estate, pour a vast amount of concrete, lay down a vast amount of cables. There's actually most of those roads have cables running underneath all of that concrete. There's a lot of cable work in there. Bridges, tunnels, all of the concrete that goes into the ramps. And you get almost no revenue from this. In the 2000s, some people thought that we could build highways with public-private partnerships. Very few successful highways have been built as toll roads, where the toll road pays for itself. Currently in the United States, there is only one toll road, one in Houston, that is actually running a profit. Nearly all of the other toll roads built by private companies in the United States are running at a major, major loss. Airports are a bigger deal than highways. A statistical study by John Casarda showed that the major determinant of growth in American cities is how good their airport is. Airports are amazingly expensive. They require vast amounts of real estate. They require vast amounts of cement. They involve vast amounts of very expensive technological structure, like all the radar systems for landing and taking off safely. What revenue do you get from running an airport? You can sell the airplane's gasoline. You can sell parking to passengers. You have a little hotel for people who are caught through bad weather. And you have restaurants and convenience stores. Essentially, an airport selling gas, selling quickie meals, and selling drinks is not that different from a very big 7-Eleven. There is no way that gas, drinks, and $8 French fries are going to pay for that much real estate and that much concrete. So airports are nearly entirely money losers. There is no major airport in the United States that's ever been built by a private corporation for profit. A few executive airports for private planes, yes. Major city airports, no. But those airports determine the wealth of their city. So if you're in a city without an airport that's any good, the first thing you want is to expand that airport. And only the government is going to have the money to do that. Defense. Most capitalist nations have defense needs that are just as important. Most capitalist nations are dependent on petroleum that is not within their borders. Most capitalist nations have to defend their nationals when they go overseas. Most capitalist nations have to defend their economic interests overseas. And there are individuals who do want to attack the nation simply on ideological or political grounds. Without defense, you are completely vulnerable. It is profitable to sell supplies to the government. Selling planes to the government, selling weapons to the government, selling computer systems to the government, selling rifles to the government, that's easy. That's profitable. The government pays good money. So there's lots of private military contractors. There is no money to sending a bunch of equipment and people overseas to be killed. To have a bunch of your planes crashed and shot down, to have your ship sunk and have all those people die. So supplying the armed forces is lucrative. Running the wars is not. There is no major military force today that defends itself with mercenaries. Sure, there's a handful of mercenaries here for there for the occasional dark ops operation. And very, very poor countries hire mercenaries because they have no choice. Or they don't trust their own soldiers who might overthrow the leader. But none of these people are major geopolitical powers, and none of them are wealthy. Every nation with economic interest to defend pays for its own military through the government. If you don't pay for the military, you're not going to like the consequences. Scientific research. People think that scientific research comes from scientists working in labs. And in Hollywood, the scientists working in labs come from mysterious corporations, like the Dvorak Corporation, which is the mythical company in the movie The Fly, the remake. In fact, very little of the research and development in our country occurs in corporations. And that which does is generally highly applied. It's not that corporations are lazy and stupid. It's that most scientific research does not make money. The overwhelming amount of studies that scientists do are either failures. You try something, it doesn't work. The lab rats died. The vaccine accomplished nothing. Oh, well. Or they're on very abstract topics, suitable for general knowledge, but with no obvious payoff. Who does the basic R&D? Universities. Who pays? Now, some of those universities are private. Harvard and Stanford, the University of Chicago, they're private. Many of those universities are public. Wisconsin Madison, California Berkeley, North Carolina Chapel Hill, Texas Austin. More importantly, though, whether it's Harvard or it's Texas Austin, government agencies bankroll the overwhelming majority of their research. The big people who pay for research are the National Science Foundation, the National Institute of Health, and in a third place, the Pentagon. Without those dollars, all of those Harvard and Stanford labs close up shop. China and the Chinese government is spending huge amounts of money to be our equal in scientific research. If their government outspends ours and their plan works, then don't be surprised if the economic center of weight of the global economic system shifts and shifts adversely for the United States. What does death by cruddy government look like? If the government is mismanaging the economy and not providing what the economy needs, you get economic stagnation. You get high unemployment. And you get technological stagnation. With technological stagnation, nothing works. With economic stagnation, your marvelous plan to start a company fails because the economy's too rough to let it survive, or the money's not there for you to get an investor. So public projects fail, private projects fail, economic projects fail, cultural projects fail, health projects fail, all sorts of things fail. When the government is not working, government employees lose a lot of their motivation to be honest. If you're living in a situation where your agency can do nothing, where what you're doing is moving the deck chairs around the Titanic, and someone offers you a nice bribe, why the hell not take it? You're not going to be any more effective if you don't take it. So general all-purpose failure leads to general all-purpose corruption. And yes, corruption causes failure, but it feeds back into itself, making more corruption. Once you've got corruption, you've got high crime. Once the judges are on the take, the police are on the take, the jailers are on the take, the criminals go nuts. And no one bribes better than criminals. So everyone is in danger. personal security is low. You could be mugged. You could have your children kidnapped. You could have a bunch of thieves drive up to your warehouse and drive off with everything you have, burning down the warehouse. People are afraid. When corruption is high, crime is high, and fear is high, people start scapegoating. The most common way to scapegoat is to go ethnic. Find a group you don't like, blame them. When we think about societal death, we think about huge ecological catastrophes. Nuclear war! A giant atomic plant explodes! Oh my God, we're all going to die! Because we look at things in a Hollywood way. We want big action. We want big fire. But societies do not die from spectacular catastrophes. It can happen, but it's rare. Rome fell. The city of Rome was sacked and burnt to the ground 3 times. It was burnt down to the ground once by barbarians. They rebuilt. It was burnt down to the ground a second time, barbarians. They rebuilt. It was burnt down by a third time, barbarians who just stayed and governed the place. Ah, well, so much for that empire. But it had been falling economically for the previous 200 years. It fell because it couldn't raise the armies to keep the barbarians out of the city 3 times. Corruption was rife. Economic activity was a small fraction of what it had been in the age of Augustus, in the glory days. So it was a poorer, weaker, less effective place, making the actual third sacking almost a non-event. It was already practically dead before it did die. Like Rome, some societies decline slowly. They die in a hospital bed over a long period. They die in their sleep one night, wetting the bed. Does all this mean that society has to die soon and that we're all going to live miserable lives? No. Keep in mind that if we were to extend our life from 650 years to 1,000, that would give a good solid 350 years continuing of prosperity and well-being. Now, how do we get that? A lot of this comes from what people really do once they can make a commitment to health. Just like as an old person, you can see what the risks are. You can stop smoking. You can start exercising. You can start getting plenty of rest. You can go to the doctor about the condition you've been stalling about dealing with. Societies have the same options. The book describes some of the most important strategies. I will just mention one factor here. Maintaining faith in what government can do and not starving the government that's going to be critical. We want to have faith in our society, faith in our government, a refusal to let ourselves be divided, an insistence in planning for the long term, an insistence in making personal sacrifices so that other people can do better, and an insistence on working together. There are even more steps that are possible than that. But if we choose to live, we can live. If we choose to fight, we can die. And how willing are people to contribute to the well being of other people and for the world as a whole so that all of us can live rather than all of us dying?